Thank you for listening to the John Calvin podcast. For early access, bonus episodes, and a range of community benefits, sign up at johncalvinpod.com/support. That's johncalvinpod.com/support. Hello and welcome back to the John Calvin podcast. My name is Matt. Today we're going to be continuing our Myth or Reality series in which we're looking at popular perceptions of Calvin. And today we're going to be asking, was Calvin an evangelical who had a kind of conversion experience like those described in modern evangelicalism? Now, Calvin is very much claimed as the evangelical par excellence. So Charles Spurgeon, the great evangelical Baptist preacher, said, "Among all those that have been born of women, there has not arisen a greater than John Calvin. No age before him ever produced his equal, and no age afterwards has seen his rival." Or B.B. Warfield said that no man had a more profound view of God than John Calvin. So you can hear just from those quotes that many evangelicals see Calvin as this kind of hero of their movement. And it's not hard to see why. The 4,000 expository sermons that Calvin preached, his commentaries, his Institutes of the Christian Religion contained 3,000 scriptural references. The Geneva, where he was pastor, became a safe haven for evangelicals fleeing persecution. So it's not hard to see why evangelicals like Calvin. However, one of the core tenets of evangelicalism is this idea of conversion. So Wesley's famous experience of feeling his heart strangely warmed, the sudden change from darkness to light. Calvin is very interesting because one of his favourite images of the Christian life is that of a pilgrim, journeying through the land of shadows and death until we're home with Christ. In his commentary on the Psalms, as a mature man looking back on his life, Calvin does talk about a sudden change of mind that brought him to a teachable state of mind. The degree to which that can be correlated with modern evangelical emphases on conversion experience is very much an open debate. Although Calvin speaks in the Psalms commentary about a sudden change of mind, which sounds quite similar to an evangelical conversion experience, elsewhere Calvin speaks about his spiritual journey in much more gradual terms, and this is far more the normal way that Calvin expresses himself. So in his famous debate with Sadoleto, for example, Calvin speaks of coming round to the Reformation way of seeing things in a very gradual way. Speaking about these differences, though, in Calvin's account of his conversion, Bruce Gordon says this, and I found this quite helpful. "The two accounts are not antithetical, revealing some inconsistency in Calvin's memory, but rather two different ways of expressing the same reality. And this gives us reason to pause and consider what he meant by conversion." Bruce Gordon goes on, "From his earliest Christian writings, the young Frenchman described the Christian life with metaphors of journeying and pilgrimage. The image was as old as the ancient books of the Hebrew Bible, but Calvin's brilliance lay in his ability to infuse old traditions with new life." So this idea of the pilgrimage or the journey in Calvin can also be seen in his doctrine of baptism. So Calvin decisively rejects adult baptism and maintains a Protestant version of baptismal regeneration. So in his chapter on infant baptism in the Institutes, Calvin says, quote, "Now it is perfectly clear that those infants who are to be saved, as some are surely saved from that early age, are previously regenerated by the Lord." So that sounds pretty clear, doesn't it? In Calvin's antidote to the Council of Trent, Calvin says, "We assert that the whole guilt of sin is taken away in baptism, so that the remains of sin still existing are not imputed. That this may be more clear, let my readers call to mind that there is a twofold grace in baptism, for therein both remission of sins and regeneration are offered to us. We teach that full remission is made, but that regeneration is only begun and goes on making progress during the whole of life. Accordingly, sin truly remains in us and is not instantly in one day extinguished by baptism, but as the guilt is effaced, it is null in regard to imputation." So all of this is to say, Calvin doesn't seem to advocate for the modern evangelical understanding of conversion without some careful qualifications. Calvin sees the Christian life in a much more gradual and actually, I would say, realistic way, and that sin is truly remitted for the elect in baptism. And in that sense, Calvin's actually not very individualistic. He still thinks baptism does something for infants. So was Calvin an evangelical? Did he subscribe to conversionism? I think in many ways Calvin shares similar commitments to evangelicals, which can make spotting his divergences and differences all the harder. Calvin shares the commitment to Scripture that evangelicals have, but he conceives of faith primarily as this ongoing journey, which is started not in the moment of faith, but when the child is baptized. In that sense, I think it's important that Calvin isn't forced into the mold of modern evangelical conversionism, because in so doing, we can miss the really beautiful and gradual way that Calvin wants us to see the life of faith. And also the fact that for Calvin, baptism really does actually effect union with Christ for God's people. So that's my take on whether Calvin is an evangelical. Yes, in some ways, but also no in others. I hope that this episode has been helpful, and stay tuned for next week for your weekly dose of John Calvin.